Our next session is Foundations of Natural Capital, and we have 3 speakers in this section. And you will have time for a few questions at the end of each speaker, but we're going to bring all the 3 speakers back as a panel, so don't panic if you don't get your question in. So our first speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce Katie McRobert. She's Executive Director at the Australian Farm Institute. She's been part of that team since late 2017, holding roles as a Senior Researcher and General Manager before becoming Executive Director in April 2024. So congratulations, Katie. Great stuff. So she's on a heap of external advisory committees. You have their bios in the program, and I encourage them to read them. But AFI has given her the opportunity to take a deep dive into evidence-based policy research. So I'll let her explain the topic of her talk. So welcome, Katie.
Good morning, everyone. Now, that was a nice introduction to me. Thank you, Kerry, very much. For those who aren't aware of what the Australian Farm Institute does, it's an evidence-based policy think tank, for want of a better term, although I'm not a big fan of the term think tank, for agricultural policy issues. And it's the only one in Australia. In fact, it's the only one in the Australasian region. It's been running since 2004, so it's our 20th year of operations this year. And it's our job to provide evidence-based research and analysis that informs good policy to benefit Australian farmers' economic and social well-being. So that's what we're here to do. And our research takes us very broadly across all of these different topics of natural capital. I'm going to try and stick just to ESG today, and I might go down a few little rabbit holes as we go through. The first thing I want to do, though, is provide a little bit of a framing piece, because when people see the term sustainability or when they hear terms like ESG, I do see a lot of times that a wall just goes down across their eyes and they go, oh, I know what you mean. You want me to do extra work on top of what I'm already doing just so I can prove to somebody who doesn't even care about what I'm really doing so that I don't have to do this terrible reporting thing. That's not what I mean when I use the term sustainability. The frame of reference with which I want you to take all of the things I'm going to tell you this morning, and hopefully what the rest of the speakers will also present to you, is that sustainability is not about marketing jargon. You can use it in terms of getting a premium and doing extra reporting as well, but a sustainable farm business is one that's here for the long haul, one that looks to future productivity and profitability and continued stewardship of all the many resources that go into making your farming business successful. That's what sustainability is. Now, ESG is related to sustainability. It involves reporting on a set of considerations beyond the financial, including environmental issues, social and corporate governance, and these are usually considered in terms of investing and in compliance reporting. So it's related to sustainability, but it's not exactly the same thing. ESG feels like a fairly new concept for a lot of people because it's not something you have to do on a daily basis yet. It is definitely not new. You would have heard the term triple bottom line or people, profit and planet. It's been around since the 1970s in force. That's as old as me. I was going to say older than me. And the book Triple Bottom Line, which is where a lot of these terms come from, was actually published more than 20 years ago. So it's not a new concept. It's maybe a new badging of a new concept, and there may be new ways of discussing the concept and also different, I guess, requirements for you to be aware of and invested in this particular topic. So when we talk about ESG, environment, social and governance, we're using those terms because we're trying to describe the different capitals that go into your business. Now, this is all going to be very high-level stuff. I promise you it gets a lot more grounded, not from me, unfortunately, I'm just here to set the scene, but from following speakers. So bear with me while we talk about all of this very out there sort of stuff. But think about the capitals that you use to put into your business. It's not just the money that you use to make your business work on farm. It's not just about the equipment that you use or the environmental resources that you use. Along with your financial capital, of course, you've got your plant, property and equipment. You've got human capital, the people who run the business, that's you, and also the people that you employ within that business. Additional to that human capital, you've got social capital. And people tend to see this again sometimes as a negative thing, that social licence sounds like something it's been imposed upon you by community groups or activist groups. Social licence just means that unspoken contract that we all have. It's about driving on the left-hand side of the road because we all agreed it would be a good idea for us to choose one side of the road. That's what social licence is about. It's about understanding we work within a wider community that has certain expectations. Sometimes they don't necessarily align directly with ours, but it's our job to make sure we keep that communication open. Intellectual capital is dramatically undervalued in Australian agriculture. We have an enormous wealth of intellectual capital that we basically don't value in any meaningful way, which is a terrible shame. And of course, we've got our natural capital on which all of this depends. Now, the reason that these are being placed in this particular context, this is coming from an international financial reporting standards system. There was a change more than a decade ago to move away from strictly financial reporting to look at reporting on all these different elements that go into a business to make sure that people had a really clear eye on true sustainability of their businesses, not just environmental, but all of these other options as well. The next diagram is going to be a complex one. Stick with me. You don't have to take all of this in at once. This schematic just describes in a kind of visual way what we were talking about with those different capitals go into your organisation or business as an input, right? You draw down on your financial capital, you use your manufactured capital, you use your intellectual and human capital to actually create things from your farming business. As you do that, those turn into outputs and go back out into the system, and that's how the organisation functions. But if you are continually drawing down on those resources and not reinvesting back into those resources, that's where you have a problem. And that's why these kinds of systems, like ESG reporting, can help you keep a clearer eye what you're drawing down from, but also what you're reinvesting back into to make sure, for example, if you're drawing down your human capital, you're making sure you're looking after yourself and you're looking after the people within your team so that you still have a workforce functioning for the years to come. Right, so, drink of water. Because now we get into the fun stuff. We're going to talk about the primary drivers for ESG reporting, which is the environmental, the social and the governance elements I talked about before. The big one, the elephant in the room, the unshakable one, is that climate change is impacting Australian agriculture right now. We've been showing this graph for a few years as an example of how things are not going particularly well for Australian agriculture. There's a very similar one that we used to use, which is unfortunately a little outdated, which shows a projection of climate change impacts, if not arrested, on Australian agriculture in a very negative way. This one's from ABARES. The other one that we used to show is from the Commonwealth Bank. So it's not just research institutions who are looking at this and going, we feel like we're a bit concerned as a scientist. Your financial institution is worried about how climate change is impacting your business today and in the next 10 years and in the next 15, 20 years, and what that means for your financial sustainability. So if we don't do something about climate change right now, we are all in trouble as farmers, and that's why the E, or the environmental part, comes first in ESG. Social. Oh, how many social issues can we get into in less than 20 minutes? Not many. Just a few of the ones that sort of come to mind, I guess, for this region in particular too, would be workforce issues. Competition for resource use is a very big one. And when we say resource, we don't just mean land. We're also talking about energy and labour and water resources as well. It's not just that agriculture is having to compete with different industries for workforce. We're also now under pressure about how we use land in a decarbonised future as well. It's about consumers' expectations. So we talked before about social licence, so I won't go into more detail about that. But that social licence, which feels like a very abstract thing, is actually, it's existential for Australian farmers. If you're not thinking about how you're reacting to what your consumers want, that community pressure very quickly turns into market pressure. So you do have to keep a very close eye on those kinds of drivers. And then we've got the governance ones. So I've got a whole page of notes here that I've got to go back to so I don't miss what I need to talk about. For the two big ones I want to mention, these are not the only things that are coming your way, but these are the two really big ones I want you to keep in mind. The first is mandatory climate-related financial disclosures. The Australian government has signed up to make sure that all businesses in Australia will report on climate-related financial disclosures, so how their business is materially impacted by potential climate change. And that was going to be by July, so next month. They've pushed that back 6 months, starting for January. Good news for you is, at least for now, that's very, very large businesses. I'm going to assume there's no $5 billion agricultural business in the room today. So that's somebody else's problem in the short term. But very large businesses and funds with a lot of assets under control, under ownership, anyone subject to annual reporting under the Corporations Act, they have to report from the start of next year on how their business is responding to the exposure they have to climate impacts. So for farming, that's a pretty big deal. That's everyone in the supply chain. So Group 1, the big ones, January 2025. The rest will sort of stage in along to 2027. Most small and medium enterprises will be exempt. However, the larger businesses have to report on their Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 are terms you'll hear a lot. The best way to try and keep those in mind are as burn, buy and beyond. Scope 1 is what you burn in terms of the things, the energy that you use. Scope 2 is what you buy, things you bring into the business that you're directly responsible for. And Scope 3 is everything else. That's the beyond part. So most farming businesses come into the Scope 3 for supply chain businesses. So although you might not have to report, they're going to be asking you what you know so they can report on their Scope 3s. Okay, the next one, which is a really big, scary one, is the EUDR, so another acronym to put in your pocket for the rest of today. EUDR is the European Deforestation Regulation. Now, this does come into effect from the 30th of December 2024, and most people, when I say most people, I don't mean just this room, most people in Europe don't know what it means yet, and yet it's coming into play. This regulation will apply to cattle, cocoa, coffee, wood, oil palm, rubber and soy. So there's a few things there that we don't really have an exposure to. There's a couple of ones there that we have a very big exposure to, and we need to know what's going on. The EUDR will require people who produce cattle or wood or soy to provide the geo-coordinates of the lifespan of their product. So that means cattle from birth to slaughter need a geolocated tag that goes with them through the supply chain. No one knows how to do that yet, and yet it's going to be a regulation. There has to be proof associated with that geolocation that your product is not associated with deforestation, and deforestation is not properly defined yet. The burden of proof is going through the entire supply chain, and even though we don't trade with Europe specifically as a big exposure in a trading partner sense, anyone who's got a trading chain that goes through Europe, which is almost everyone, will be exposed to this rule. Now, that will result in 3 tiers of risk being applied by the European Union of high, medium and low risk. Low-risk countries will then have a very simplified due diligence regime. High-risk countries will have enhanced scrutiny, and it's also not clear how risk will be defined. So that's the terrifying part. What I want to just reaffirm, and this will become clear as you hear the following speakers as well. I've talked a lot about the risks and what feel like threats. There is also equal opportunity in ESG reporting and sustainability. So just keep that in mind. So I've got to try and rush through the next few bits, but I just wanted to make sure that you also keep in mind ESG is not about putting a price on things, it's about how we attach value to those things that matter to us. And I've put those photos back there as an aide-memoir about attaching value to your human capital, to your natural capital, as well as your financial capital. It's about trying to figure out how we can measure that value. Now, this is important because values-based choices drive behaviour. For example, people buy designer handbags instead of putting their keys in plastic bags because they just like the designer handbag, even though the plastic bag does the job. People vote a particular way, even sometimes against their own logical or rational understanding of a particular policy topic, just because they like to vote that way. And this is why people continue to farm, even though there are arguably much easier ways to make a living, because all these things are values-based choices that say something about who you are, how you see yourself in the world, and what's important to you. So those values-based choices are associated with the ESG story. I'm going to have to rush through this bit because we are near the end. But an example of an ESG-aligned sustainability reporting system, which takes into account those values, is the Australian Agricultural Sustainability Framework that the AFI has been working on for the past few years with the National Farmers Federation and our Department of Agriculture. This framework helps to articulate some of those shared values, but also puts things into the ESG context. You can see there's environmental stewardship there, the E, there's people, animals and community, or the S, and then there's economic resilience, or the G. And I'll skip very quickly through this next bit, which just shows where this all fits within a big system. It doesn't overtake other sustainability frameworks. It relates to existing commodity frameworks. It responds to global pressures. Most notably, it's very clearly related to ESG reporting, although the framework is not a reporting tool itself. Got to the end. Excellent. Frequently asked questions on ESG. Am I being forced into this? Short answer, pretty much. That's not necessarily such a bad thing. It feels onerous and it feels a bit overwhelming, but if you adopt this in the right way, it can tell you a lot about your business and your own sustainability and where your strengths and weaknesses are. So although it feels like it's coming at you very fast, there are opportunities to be had here. Show me the data is the next question everybody asks. And I would love someone to show me the data, and we've been working on that very hard for the past few years. The good news is that there is some light at the end of the tunnel. Probably can't see that little article there, but there's a lot of academic research into how you can use farm business tools and farm business software to demonstrate the sustainable actions you're already undertaking. Most people in this room are already doing most of the things that are required of them under ESG requirements. And the last one is, what does this mean on farm? And that's where I get to hand over to the next speakers to tell you more about what this means on farm. Because all of this, while it does feel a bit overwhelming, is about future-proofing Australian agriculture, and that's what I want you to keep in mind for the rest of today. Thanks for having me.
You're in well in time, Katie, which gives us more time for questions. And it's reassuring to know that we're already doing a lot of these things. It's the terminology that we perhaps don't understand. So we do have some microphones in the room somewhere. Have we got some microphones? Yes, holding up. Has anyone got a question? Put your hand up and they'll bring a microphone. We're still reeling a little bit from all of that. It really was a whirlwind effort there. Yes, we have a question in the centre there. Thanks.
Thanks. My question is, does the EDR, how do they propose Australia? Is that a risk at the moment or a non-risk? They see us?
Oh, is Australia seen as a risk?
Yes.
Australia's seen as a massive risk because the way that Europe views Australia is that it doesn't pay any attention to deforestation and it likes to write its own rules. Whether or not that's true is an academic debate for another day. That's the European perspective on Australian agriculture. So it's a risk at the moment. Department of Agriculture is extremely alive to this risk and they're working very hard on it. Standards Australia is also undertaking some work on what a deforestation standard for Australia would look like. And Cattle Australia is also doing their own independent research to try and bolster all of this with making sure the Australian context is reflected. Because the problem is if we don't step up and decide for ourselves what we want to define deforestation as, someone else will tell us what they think it means with very little understanding of our own environmental conditions and expectations. So yeah, risk.
Do we have any other questions? Probably should, so don't run away. Oh, yep, we've got one over here.
I'll use my post.
Charlie. No,
Charlie.
we know you could.
It's right there, Charlie. It's right behind you.
I don't need a mic.
Charlie, we're recording it.
Because they're recording, Charlie. We have to get the mic.
Oh, I have to do it properly.
Yeah.
My question is, you've talked a lot about risks. What do you think is the biggest opportunity to come out of this?
I think the opportunity is understanding your own farm business better because we all get very, very busy. I get very busy and I don't have to run a farm, which is a much harder job, to be quite frank. We get very busy with what's in front of us day to day. It's hard for us to step back and take a look at those long-term opportunities and threats to our own business. being forced into a situation where you have to account for them and say, this is my environmental footprint, this is my social footprint, this is what I'm doing from a governance perspective, means you have a much clearer view of your own business and can then respond more proactively and develop a plan or a strategy, hopefully with other people and not having to do it all by yourself at midnight at the kitchen table, with other people to make sure that you've got a resilient farm business that'll be successful for generations to come.
One final question. Oh, we've got a question here. Oh, over there.
Sorry, just a quick one.
Yes.
So why is our national parties, as in the Liberal and the Coalition, moving in a path that's directing so contrary to all of this? Is this something to be fearful? What's your take on this whole situation where we've suddenly got a circumstance where we're going to an election in 12 months and our choices are to ignore this whole situation and go in a completely different direction?
Yeah. So the AFI is a policy organisation, not political, so I have to be very careful to give an apolitical answer. But the short answer is that's about buying votes. People are frightened, and there are a lot of votes in addressing your message to people who are scared and saying, I'll look after you. The damage that can be done with stepping away from targets and walking away from conversations is that you're leaving yourself exposed, not just to these sort of regulations that we've talked about that are coming to you, but the actual genuine threat of climate change impacting farming business in the immediate future, not in the long-term future. And so stepping back from that discussion is the wrong action in every way.
Thank you, Katie. Awesome background there. Without wanting to put another scare into the room, would you like to comment on the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which is coming, another freight train coming shortly after the climate-related?
Climate-related, yes. So nature-related financial disclosures is just even broader than climate-related financial disclosures. Another freight train, I guess, but the good news is that being prepared for climate-related financial disclosures puts us in a good position for nature-related. Nature-related is more about the natural capital, that bigger picture, whereas climate is the direct impacts from emissions reduction activities, for example. Australia is quite involved in the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, which is a good thing. It means that our context is going into those discussions and that our different production systems and different social and cultural expectations are being addressed. But yes, it's another acronym to be putting on your watch list for sure.